Hello, scholars. This is another United States history lecture. I am Dr. King Owen, and we'll be talking this time about globalization and its discontents. 1301 is the target for this lecture, and we're going to look at the expansion of the United States' involvement in the world, particularly through technology and the ways that that has changed work and business in the United States. Globalization has had its fair share of critics over the past 40 years. And some of those critics have pointed out the difficulty of regulating multinational corporations. That is, a corporation that operates in more than one nation. So instead of thinking of an American business that is solely American and that maybe sells products around the world, American businesses actually operate in other places in the world. And the criticism of many of these multinationals is that they often move to other countries where they can exploit cheaper labor. That is, they can pursue profit in a place where labor costs are lower, where there's much less regulation of how those companies can operate and do business. And so lots of critics of globalization have noted that multinational corporations essentially exploit and abuse their workers. Another line of criticism has been that multinational corporations are spurring conformity. That is, instead of having the uniqueness of locally made things that are enjoyed only in certain areas, we see the increasing dominance of the world's markets by standardized cookie cutter products. And there are several names for this. Some of the critics have called it McDonaldism, the idea that McDonald's is everywhere. It doesn't matter where you go in the world, you can have McDonald's, and it will be the same bland, boring, bad for you food. Other people have called it Coca-Colization, since Coca-Cola operates around the world and you can get the same product around the world. So many critics have said that globalization has created this world in which everything's the same, and we've lost the uniqueness and the thought of locally made products. Many critics have also pointed out that multinational corporations can do damage to the environment in countries where there are fewer environmental regulations. And so they're able to pollute, destroy the resources, use up the resources of those environments, and not really face any kind of regulation for it, since they are doing this in a country not like the United States, where there might be laws preventing this environmental damage. So you can see, as much as globalization has connected the world and allowed us to share things around the world and be connected to people, at the speed of just the internet's ability to connect us, there are criticisms of the ways in which globalization has damaged the environment, damaged the lives of workers and places, and promoted the cookie cutterization of products around the world. Finally, we could say that globalization has undermined unions here in the United States. Since companies can threaten to move across borders, it weakens the position of labor here in America. Since that company can simply say, well, if you don't like our policies, we'll just move to Thailand or something like that. And so the workers feel as if they have lost some kind of power, knowing that the company can simply shut its doors and move halfway across the world. So globalization's effects are not just on the other places where the US shows up, but also on the effects here at home. To help bring together trade around the world, to regulate trade, to encourage trade, we had the formation of the World Trade Organization, or the WTO, in 1995, with the goal of trying to create trade policies, regulations that will make flow of goods and businesses and services increase around the world. That indicates that some people like what globalization is able to do. New markets, new places to make money, new business strategies. It's a new frontier as businesses seek profits in other places in the best way they can. And it's the job of the WTO to help. The WTO came in for a fair share of criticism. There were protests against it by people who felt like the WTO was promoting, trade at the expense of the environment, trade at the expense of workers. So here is a picture of some protesters against the WTO meeting, one that was held in Seattle. You can see here the protests brought out the police, who subdued the crowd, as they have typically done in many of these cases with riot control measures. Another illustration of the globalization of the world and the promotion of trade is NAFTA, which was a treaty that got started under President Reagan in terms of its discussions and was finally made a reality under Bill Clinton in 1994. NAFTA stands for North American Free Trade Agreement, and it is essentially an elimination of tariffs. That is, the U.S. will work towards reducing tariff barriers between itself, Mexico, and Canada. This is to promote, as the name indicates, freer trade between these three countries. NAFTA has operated for a number of years, but just as a side note, was very recently modified by a new agreement that went into effect in 2020. Minor changes were made to the tariffs and the schedules for those, but essentially the whole idea is still there. There will be free trade. The goods should flow freely across borders. The consequences of NAFTA over those years since 1994 have been to promote the movement of jobs across borders. We actually saw this even before NAFTA. So for example, many companies can move to Mexico where labor is cheaper and operate in a country where regulations for business and labor are different than the United States. Places are welcome U.S. businesses bringing jobs. At one point, the largest private employer in Mexico was actually Walmart, they're called, these companies are called maquiladoras. They go and operate in Mexico, but they're, non-Mexican companies. And they can pay lower wages since the cost of living is different in Mexico, and there are fewer regulations. That has led U.S. companies to downsize. So you can fire the workers working here in America, and then you can outsource those jobs to someplace overseas. For example, lots and lots of call centers operate in overseas markets, for example, in India. And so if you need technical support or any kind of support, the workers in those countries making less than they do in the United States will take those calls for you. And outsourcing then has meant that Americans are not able to have those jobs. So there has been an effect on the United States, which in recent years has led to a campaign to encourage Americans to buy American. That is, to buy products made inside the United States. Smartly, many multinational corporations from other countries then build their products here in the United States. So it's not just the US going overseas and operating businesses. Those foreign companies come here and operate as well, which is encouraging the idea of, the borders are open, the flow of business, the flow of trade is open. And what does that mean for labor? What does that mean for the environment? What does that mean for regulation? What does that mean for the entire global economy in this world that is very much very interconnected? Lots and lots of criticisms of NAFTA, such as NAFTA would lead to environmental disasters, where countries would have not as many regulations, so American businesses would just pollute. It would bring lots and lots of Mexican workers into the market, particularly exploiting the labor of lots of young Mexican folks. People in America who worked in American factories would see their jobs go away and be pushed into service work, such as offering fries with that. The idea is that NAFTA not only promotes free trade, but because it promotes this connection between the countries, globalization, it's going to have lots of other effects on labor, on work inside the United States, on the environment, indeed, even on immigration policies in the US. So opening these borders economically creates winners and losers economically. And that has, of course, led to lots of debate in our own time about the wisdom of these globalization policies. Well, that has been our look at some of the effects of globalization in the 20th century United States. Join us next time for another look at recent American history.